Okay, this will be the second portion of the Chapter 6 lecture over cellular respiration. Remember that the electron transport chain ultimately transfers electrons to oxygen. So oxygen is going to be the final electron acceptor in this cellular respiration process. Each link in the electron transport chain is a molecule, and it's usually a protein. Again, there seems to be this theme here that proteins are very important for all sorts of not only structures but functions within our cells. So the first molecule in the chain accepts an electron from NADH. Remember previously NAD+ was that initial electron acceptor and it was reduced to NADH. So now NADH is going to pass an electron onto the first part of the electron transport chain. The final molecule in the chain drops the electrons to oxygen. Simultaneously, oxygen combines with hydrogen to form water. So you can kind of think of this electron transport chain as a relay race, and the baton as an electron. So each person running this race is going to be a molecule in this electron transport chain. They're passing that electron baton onto the next molecule in the chain. Here we have an overall depiction of this process. And remember, the electrons that are being passed down this chain and subsequently help to release energy ultimately are coming from food. So when we take in food, the electrons within the atoms of that food are being passed along in our mitochondria within our cells to make this process work. So again, NAD+ is that initial electron acceptor. It accepts an electron and it becomes reduced. It becomes NADH. Now, two of those electrons for every NADH molecule here, we're going to have two electrons being transported down this electron transport chain. And with each fall here, there's going to be a release of energy. So it's this stepwise release of energy that's used to make ATP. So when those electrons are transferred from one molecule to the next, that is what actually releases energy. And that energy is used to make ATP. We also have hydrogen, electrons, and oxygen combining to produce water, so that's a byproduct here. And oxygen is going to be that final electron acceptor. It has a very strong pull on electrons, so that is what is ultimately creating this cascade here. The three stages of respiration: we have glycolysis, the citric acid cycle, and the electron transport chain. And this grayish kind of brain-like looking structure here would be an individual mitochondrion, plural of course, mitochondria, within one of your cells. This is the cytoplasm in that cell. And this just shows you where these processes take place. So glycolysis takes place within the cytoplasm. The overall outcome of this is glucose produces two pyruvic acid molecules. The citric acid cycle occurs within the mitochondrion. So the two pyruvic acid molecules are going to be converted to citric acid in this citric acid cycle here. ATP is going to be produced. And the electron transport chain also takes place within the mitochondrion, produces a lot of ATP relative to the other steps. And the overall process with the ETC is a high energy transfer of electrons via carrier molecules. Okay, so the first stage is glycolysis literally means the splitting of sugar. Lysis is to break or to split. Glyco is sugar, so glycolysis is just the splitting of sugar. And enzymes are needed in order for this to occur, and those enzymes are located in the cytoplasm of cells. So that's why glycolysis occurs outside of mitochondria. It requires an initial energy input of 2 ATP molecules. So, you know the phrase, you have to spend money to make money? The same is true for this process of making ATP. We have to input 2 ATP molecules in order to get this cycle going. It produces 4 ATP molecules as well as 2 pyruvic acid molecules. So we have a net profit, if you will, of 2 ATP molecules and 2 pyruvic acids. Okay, here's a simple depiction of glycolysis. ATP is going to be reduced to ADP. Remember, a phosphate group is going to split off ATP, rendering it ADP. This is the initial energy investment phase. And what occurs here is that energy from ATP is used to take a 6-carbon glucose molecule and break it in half. So that initial 6-carbon glucose molecule that you have taken in from food, for example, is going to be split into these 2 3-carbon molecules. The energy harvest phase occurs when NAD+ accepts an electron and is reduced to NADH. So the 3-carbon molecules here are actually donating electrons to the NAD+ in order to form NADH. And the only thing that changes here, notice you have an additional phosphate group bonding to those 3-carbon molecules. Okay, continuing with the cycle, enzymes are going to be transferring phosphate groups from the fuel molecules to ADP, which in turn creates ATP. So those additional phosphate groups are going to create ATP from ADP, and remember that ATP is the universal source of energy for cells to perform their functions with. Okay, stage 2 of cellular respiration is the citric acid cycle. But before it enters the citric acid cycle itself, a little bit of preparation needs to be done to these pyruvic acid molecules. So remember, our input from glycolysis is going to be a 3-carbon molecule, which is pyruvic acid. First, before pyruvic acid can help with the citric acid cycle, it needs to lose a carbon. That carbon is lost in the form of CO2. So here we have that byproduct. And remember when I said that all of the CO2 that you breathe out was ultimately created in your mitochondria within your cells? Well, here that is. So pyruvic acid loses a carbon as CO2, and it becomes the 2-carbon molecule acetic acid. Then we have oxidation of the fuel generating NADH. So we have NAD+ being reduced to NADH. Finally, we have coenzyme A coming in to help, and the acetic acid is going to attach to that coenzyme A. The output of this process which will enter the citric acid cycle, is acetyl CoA. So it's just acetic acid with that coenzyme A attached to it. Well, it would have helped if I would have put that up there sooner. But pyruvic acid from glycolysis must be converted to a form that is usable in the citric acid cycle, which is what I just went over there. So take a moment to review that if you would like, and I'm going to go ahead and move on to the citric acid cycle itself. Okay, so acetic acid and a 4-carbon acceptor molecule join forces to create the 6-carbon molecule citric acid. For each acetic acid that enters the cycle as fuel, 2 carbon dioxide molecules exit as waste. Some energy from the fuel is used to produce ATP directly. However, more energy is captured in the form of NADH and the closely related electron carrier, which is FADH2. So you can think of these electron carriers as those relay racers passing electrons from one to the next. And when those electrons are transferred to the next molecule, you get a release of energy. Finally, each carbon atom that entered the cycle as fuel is accounted for as CO2 exhaust, and the 4-carbon acceptor molecule is recycled. So all of that CO2 that we're breathing out, ultimately, the carbon ultimately came from food we take in. It is converted to CO2 waste products within our mitochondria, and we also have acceptor molecules being recycled. So it's not like you have to have a brand new molecule each time this cycle runs. Those acceptor molecules can be reused. Okay, so the citric acid cycles once for each acetic acid molecule that is input. So it basically, this whole cycle turns twice for each glucose molecule. Remember, the glucose in this cycle is ultimately coming from food. So if you take in one glucose molecule, you're going to get the citric acid cycle occurring 2 complete turns. And this is what produces 2 ATP molecules as your net profit, as well as carbon dioxide. Okay, stage 3 of the cellular respiration process is the electron transport chain. The molecules that participate in the ETC are built into the inner membranes of mitochondria. So here we have this depiction of a mitochondrion. Remember, this is an organelle within eukaryotic cells. The inner membrane here is shown beneath the outer membrane. And you have all of this infolding here that ultimately creates a lot of surface area for these electron transport chains. So it's highly folded, just like our brains are highly folded to basically increase our capacity to store information. Because these inner membranes of the mitochondria are highly folded, you have more surface area, and within these folds are thousands of copies of the electron transport chain. So it's not as if one of your cells has a mitochondria with a couple of electron transport chains. There are thousands of copies of the electron transport chain just within a single cell. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause here since I'm about out of time for this segment, and I'll pick up where I leave off.